Good morning, everyone. And at the outset, I would like to thank Dr. Vitull Gupta and the organizing team for this opportunity. And as Sir has already briefed, so this was in 2016 that at the UN meeting, it was said that a fundamental long-term threat to human health, sustainable production, food production, and development. This was said in the context of antimicrobial resistance. But if we consider it, it is equally true for the climate changes that we are now looking at. So individually, we know that climate change and antimicrobial resistance, they are both public health concerns, as Sir just mentioned. But we also now have evidence to suggest that these two are connected. So for this session, I'm going to discuss what is the interplay between these two public health issues that we're looking at, climate change and antimicrobial resistance, and look at some ways of how we can tackle this. Okay. Now, this was a UK study in 2016 which reported that if antimicrobial resistance is not addressed, then by the year 2050, 10 million lives a year and a cumulative $100 trillion of economic output will be at risk. The WHO in 2019 declared this as one of the top 10 global public health threats along with climate change. Now we are all aware of what happens when there is antimicrobial resistance. So there is increased duration of hospitalization. We move down to second and third line therapies. It increases the cost of treatment. The outcomes are inferior. And all these are something that we are all familiar with. And we are now looking at pan and multi-drug resistant organisms where we are struggling to find appropriate treatment options. And to add to this, our pipeline for new antimicrobials is not very encouraging at the moment. So this high consumption of antimicrobials that we see, we as the users and the prescribers to a large extent have contributed to this problem of antimicrobial resistance. The causes are many, and it's a complex issue which involves many factors, not just the over and the misuse of antimicrobials. Now moving on to another issue that we are all looking at the evidence of. So our media flashes things like the hottest month, glaciers are melting, food supply is under threat. So we are all looking at this. So today we can no longer deny and say that this is a problem which will happen sometime. It is already here. Now I'm going to look at infectious diseases and their influence on climate changes because many of the infectious diseases are climate sensitive. So again, there are multiple factors in play here. We are looking at the host factors, the vector factors, and we are looking at organisms which are now being seen in areas where we did not see them earlier because of the conditions that have changed. Temperatures are rising, heat related morbidity and morbidity we are looking at, but it is also influencing the bacterial growth in areas. So we are all aware that temperature itself and a rising temperature has an influence on bacterial growth. So there is now evidence to suggest that plasmid transfer and potentially gene transfer of resistant genes is facilitated by an increase in temperature. Generally, increase in temperature tends to improve the bacterial growth rates. Now, some studies are beginning to look at a correlation of a rise in temperature or a change in temperature with the growth of bacteria and the incidence of infections. So there are several studies which are being published which are correlating this, what is the area, what is the altitude and the altitude and the growth of organisms. So many of these studies are being published. So this study has looked at distance from the equator and socioeconomic factors, both which were associated with a higher risk of gram-negative bacteremia. Water vector-borne diseases is something that we see very often here in our scenario. So Zika virus, dengue, chikungunya, these are usually localized to the temperate climates because they need a higher temperature for their life cycle. But now they're moving towards the temperate climates as the global temperatures are rising. Malaria is something that we see a lot of in our country, and Dr. Datta was talking about the diagnosis and management of malaria. So here again, what we are looking at is an increased incidence of malaria in areas which earlier did not have so much of malaria. It's because of the reduced larval size and which requires the adult to feed more frequently, the rates and spreads of infection are now increasing. I'll take the case of Candida auris, which was first found out in 2009 in the human ear. And from then onwards, it has been implicated in a number of disease cases. Now, this first was a plant saprophyte, gained thermotolerance, salinity tolerance because of the influence of the climatic changes that happened. Now, it is hypothesized that it was transplanted by birds across the globe to rural areas where we see more interaction between the humans and the birds, and because of the population migration, it then moved towards the urban areas. Now, this is a candida which we now know is resistant to most of the antifungals that we know. So, this is how such species which earlier were seen in sometimes animal species, sometimes in plants, are now gaining human value. Another thing which happens is water and soil contamination. So extreme weather situations such as floods and droughts can cause contamination of the water supplies and soil with human and animal waste. This also includes some amount of antibiotic residues and resistant bacteria. Now, this creates a reservoir for the resistant microbes which can then spread into our ecosystems and the human communities. Now, as we are seeing a rise in temperature, the capacity of the atmosphere to hold water increases, storms are becoming more severe, and they come with a higher degree of precipitation. This precipitation causes more flooding, overcrowding because people now need to migrate, populations move, and it results in a higher incidence of waterborne infections, higher uses of antimicrobials, and more chances of resistance. The use of fertilizers, particularly those with nitrogen, they are known to cause increase in antibiotic resistance, and floodwater pollution by nitrogen fertilizers during the conditions of flooding because of climatic changes again leads to a rise in antibiotic resistance. Eutrophication, which is a phenomenon which we see because of increased overgrowth of simple plants and algae in the water sources, which uses up all the oxygen of the water system, is also worsened by flooding. So all of these are the implications. Now, agriculture industry also uses a lot of antimicrobials for varied reasons, some justified and some not so clear. So when there is a lot of use of antimicrobials in the livestock, again the water goes, some of the residues go into the water through the runoff, and climate change induced rainfall variability and flooding, they both exacerbate this contamination, increasing the proliferation of the resistant bacteria. Migration of populations because of these climate changes, urbanization, again they are leading to conditions which are favoring the growth of resistant bacteria because of sanitation issues, overcrowding, and lack of proper access to healthcare facilities and sanitary conditions. Okay. We are now looking at emergence of new disease patterns because we are looking at organisms which are found in areas where we did not see them earlier. So as we are going to use more antimicrobials for managing those conditions, it is thought that there will be an increase in the antimicrobial resistant patterns as well. Now this is how we looked at how climate was influencing the antimicrobial resistance. But there is the other side too, how antimicrobial resistance contributes to climate change. Now as we are looking at higher rates of antimicrobial resistance, it is resulting in hospital stays which are longer, more intensive treatments, and increased use of resources such as energy and materials, which is raising the carbon footprint. There is increased manufacturing and waste which is being generated, particularly as we move on to the second and third line options. Again, it is causing environmental degradation. Now, overuse of antimicrobials, their metabolites, they are all going into the water systems. And slowly and slowly there is resistance being developed through the water systems as well. Where in the sewage systems, they are interacting, the antimicrobials will interact with the microbes and they get dispersed into the ecosystem. The presence of microplastics is something that is not new, but it is increasing and is being linked to antimicrobial resistance now. Possibly because of genes being transferred and the organisms are developing resistant biofilms and they are not getting washed off and they are being taken up, and even nanoparticles are now being taken up through the root system of the plants and leading to antimicrobial resistance. So we see these microplastics everywhere now. Overuse in the livestock for growth purposes is something that we are all familiar with. To take an example of the use of antimicrobials to prevent mastitis and promote the milk production in cows results in an overutilization and leading to some of these residues getting into the water systems. Aquaculture again uses antimicrobials, and as we are looking at climatic changes, the incidence of diseases in the animals is also increasing, which leads to a greater use of antimicrobials in the livestock and so thus resistance. Now where does this lead us? So we understand that there are connections, that there are links between climate change and antimicrobial resistance, but it is a complex phenomenon that we are looking at. We need more evidence and we need to now look at collaborative efforts to deal with these two public health concerns effectively. So can we look at the One Health approach, which is looking at the health of humans, animals, and the environment all as a correlated phenomenon, as a solution to dealing with both of these? So what are some things we can do? We are all aware that we need to be using our antimicrobials more judiciously, get appropriate tests. We need better diagnostic facilities so that we are able to quickly and accurately test for the presence of sensitivities and the organisms. We need collaborative efforts between all the healthcare professionals. So that means the medical doctors, the veterinarians, everybody needs to come together on a common platform, join hands with the other practitioners so that we can work towards this common goal. We need innovative strategies, and of course we need more research into looking for newer antimicrobials as well. So some measures which have been effective, for example, mass vaccination of the animals, feasible, can be done, has been shown to be effective. Okay. Then collaborative research and surveillance between microbiologists, ecologists, and climate scientists to better understand the consequences and how to deal with them. And also very importantly, we need to look at the social determinants of health, because climate change disproportionately affects the vulnerable populations, including those who have a limited access to healthcare. So to summarize, antimicrobial resistance and climate change are among the top public health concerns globally. Tackling these dual threats needs a collaboration between the healthcare professionals, and successful public health interventions require the cooperation of human, animal, and environment health partners. So professionals within these sectors need to communicate, collaborate, and coordinate activities for effective interventions. So, thank you. These are some of the references.
Thank you, madam, for your masterly deliberations and lecture. And One Health approach, I think, is the solution for global benefit.
Yes, sir.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Ji.